Hi everyone, I'm Goodbyyyye and welcome to our latest Patreon project. This is called the Varsity Sweatshirt. So with our charm school theme this year, I really wanted to do something that had a vintage letterman twist to it. And I thought a sweatshirt would be perfect as we're going into back to school season. So we've given you a lot of options with this sweatshirt. You can make it cropped like the one I'm wearing with a crew neck, or you can make a V-neck, and we've also given you a hip length option. We're also going to show you a really fun hack today for removing some of the width on the cropped version and making it a little more fitted. So I'm excited to show you that. This also has a lot of options. Of course, I would love it if you all made matching varsity sweatshirts so that we can be like a little cheerleader team. But if you're not feeling that, then you could use something like a floral sweatshirt fleece or even a sequin knit or something like that to really give this the charm treatment. Of course, it's just a great basic to have in your wardrobe and pair with your Maryland jeans and your saddle shoes maybe. So we're going to be talking a lot about knits today, of course, and showing you some special knit skills. And the one that Kristen's going to be sewing on camera is the cropped version with the crew neck. So let's get started talking about fabric and supplies and our pattern pieces, and then we will get sewing. All right, so as always, we have shrunk the pattern pieces down to 25% so that we can look at them all on this table here and understand how they're going to be sewn together. So of course you have your sweatshirt front, which you're going to cut 1 on the fold, sweatshirt back, which is also cut 1 on the fold of your main fabric. And I want you to note a couple things on these pattern pieces. You have a separate cutting line for the V-neck line here, okay? So if you're gonna be doing the V-neck, make sure to follow that line rather than the crew neck here. Also, this would be your cropped length cutting line here. So if you're doing the hip version, you'll cut down here, crop length will be on this line right here. Now, the other piece that you'll be cutting in your main sweatshirt fleece or sweatshirt fabric is your sleeve. So you cut 2 of the sleeve in your fabric and make sure to make little notches make little clips for all of the marked notches on the pattern pieces. Okay, now we have a series of rectangles. I'm going to describe to you what all of these are. These are all meant to be cut in ribbing fabric, and we're going to talk more about ribbing in the next chapter. But these all are different pieces depending on the variations you're making. So these 2 pieces here are for your crew neck neckband. It has seams that meet just behind the shoulder seam. Okay, so it's cut in 2 pieces and that helps it lay really flat to the neck. So you're going to cut 1 of each of those for the crew neck. Then for your V-neck, you will cut 1 of this piece here. It's all cut in 1, no seams on that piece. Then you have your wrist cuffs. So that would be for all versions. You're going to cut 2 of these in your ribbing fabric. And then these are the waistbands. The shorter one is for the cropped version, and then the longer one would be for the hip length version. And you would cut 1 of either of those depending on the variation you are making. Okay, so those are all your pattern pieces. Next, we're going to talk more about fabric and supplies. Okay, so we're ready to talk fabric and supplies. And your charm school lesson for this month is knit fabrics, choosing knit fabrics, etc. So I'm going to spend a little more time than I normally do talking about the fabrics you might choose for this pattern. So I designed this pattern to work with knits that have 50% stretch. I'm going to talk about what that means. Now, sweatshirt fleece is probably the fabric that you're going to gravitate to for this sweatshirt. And sweatshirt fleece, as we were shopping for fabric for the samples and for testing, I found that it comes in a lot of different varieties, weights, stretch percentages. So I want to just tell you a little bit about what we found. The fabric that we made almost all of our test samples in, and also these ivory sweatshirts, is a lightweight sweatshirt fleece that is 95% cotton and 5% lycra. It's a little bit unusual for sweatshirt fleece to have lycra blended in, we found. So if you're looking for this exact one, we are linking it in the instructions. It's a Kaufman fabric called Trainer's Sweatshirt Fleece. And it's a nice lightweight one. And you'll see sweatshirt fleece has a nice fuzzy back and a smooth knit surface. And when you're looking for stretch percentage, like I said, we recommend 50% stretch. But with a garment like this that has a lot of ease, you have some wiggle room. So if you find a fabric that doesn't have as much stretch, you can adjust by sizing up. Or vice versa. If your fabric has more stretch, you can size down to get it to fit the way you want it to. Or you could just take in the side seams, all right? So because this isn't a super fitted garment, you have a little bit of room to play around. But for 50% stretch, here's how you're gonna test the stretch. So you can see this fabric stretches a lot in this direction and not as much in the other direction. And that's what we're recommending is at least 50% stretch horizontally, the way it goes around your body, and little to no vertical stretch, and that's how it goes up and down. Okay, so the way you're gonna test for that is you're gonna take your fabric and use a clear, or not clear ruler, doesn't matter, and you're gonna grab 2 inches of the fabric like this, and I'm just comparing it to the ruler, and see how far it will stretch. So my 2 inches stretches to 3 inches, right? So that means that it stretches to 50% of its original length that I tested. Okay, so that's a 50% stretch percentage. So that's about what you're looking for, but not every sweatshirt fleece is going to be that. And what's frustrating is that a lot of websites do not tell you the stretch percentage. And I know a lot of us have to order our fabric online. So I'm going to give you a couple other tips and tricks and other fabrics that you might use. This is another sweatshirt fleece that we used for our upcoming bonus pattern this month. And this one does not have any added lycra, but you can see it still stretches quite a bit, right? Just because of the structure of the knit fabric, it has mechanical stretch, which means that the stitches themselves stretch just because of the way that they are knit. Okay, and it has a very fuzzy back. So again, even though this one doesn't have lycra, it stretches to almost 50%. So with this one, you may just need, honestly, you could probably just make your same size, try it on, make sure you're happy with it. But I doubt with that little variance, you're going to be unhappy with the fit. Now, something like this is a Liberty of London sweatshirt fleece that I have had in my stash for probably 12 years. And I'm so excited we got to use it for this project. But you can see it does not stretch that much. And some sweatshirt fleeces are just very stable like this. So I would say maybe this has 20%, but we still used it for one of these samples. And it still fit because it has so much ease built in the garment and it's meant to fit in a relaxed way. But if you felt like you want it to feel a little bit more comfortable or when putting it on, or that it had more ease, you want to adjust it, you could just size up if your fabric didn't have as much stretch like this one doesn't. Now this fabric is a French terry and it's very lightweight. So if you're thinking of something for a warmer climate, this would be a great choice. It has a smooth knit front and then it has loops on the back. It doesn't have that fuzzy texture on the back. Now French terries can stretch quite a bit more. You can see this is going almost up to 70%. So with this one, I would recommend sizing down. So you don't, unless you want an oversized fit, right? So you may want to consider sizing down or taking in your side seams because it is going to fit bigger because of the added stretch. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. A few things to keep in mind about sweatshirt fleeces. I will say it's a good idea to order a swatch of anything that you're going to be hoping to make this garment in. I really committed to this one without sight unseen and ordered 5 yards of it, and it ended up working, but I wasn't really sure what I was thinking in the end because it was a totally different structure from this one that we made the other samples in. So if a website allows you to order a swatch and you have the time to do it, I would really recommend it so that you can test out that stretch percentage by yourself, feel the weight of it, make sure it's going to match your varsity letter, etc. Okay, so that's a little bit about sweatshirt fleeces. You also will want some ribbing for your neckband, cuffs, waistband. So you're going to be looking for what's called a 2x2 rib. That means that it has, if you're a knitter, you'll know what I'm talking about. You have 2 purl stitches and then 2 knit stitches. So it's a very even, narrow rib, okay? And so that's just the structure of what the rib looks like. So for this garment, you're going to want a rib that has a little more body to it. Some ribs are very slinky, and that's not going to cut it for this for these structured cuffs. Okay, so you're looking for something with a little bit more body. We link to this one from Mood Fabrics, which is a really nice sturdy rib, and it comes in yardage. We also link you to the pink ribbing that we use, which is from Amazon, and it's sold in wide rectangles meant to be made into cuffs and bands. The only problem with it is that it only comes to certain widths. So you may find in some sizes that you need to seam those pieces, and we've given you a little guidance on that in the cutting layouts, okay? But keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you can use plain fabric for your band pieces. Okay, so you could use something like this instead of the ribbing, or you could just match it to your sweatshirt as well. So that's something you could do, but to get a more traditional sweatshirt look, I would recommend ribbing. Okay, so that's a little bit about knits and the fabric you're looking for. And then for your supplies, you're going to need stretch needles or a jersey needle, something with a ball point to sew your knits with so you don't get skipped stitches. A size 80-12 or 90-14 would be a good choice for these fabrics. You will want an all-purpose polyester thread to match your ribbing and your sweatshirt fabric. And then finally, I want to show you some of the varsity letters that we used. These ones I custom ordered from Etsy. This seller makes really beautiful custom varsity patches. These are 8 inches, which is a great size for the front of your sweatshirt. I also found on Etsy these really adorable metallic letters, chenille letters. And these you can get in every, you don't have to be custom made, and you can just order them. They come as is. And what's really cute, what we did on Jeanette's sweater this month, is that we overlapped the C and the S for Charm School, and you can just do a cute little treatment like that. It gives me sort of like tennis vibes. So we're going to link you to the supplies for the chenille letters and to all of the fabrics that we used. So I hope that answers some of your questions about knits and sweatshirt fleeces and ribbing. Okay, now we're finally ready to move on to sewing. So let's get started. Okay, so we are ready to sew our shoulder seams. So you can see Kristen is sewing the cropped version here. She's actually sewing the version I was wearing in the intro to this video, so we're doing a little time traveling here. She's putting the front and back right sides together at the shoulders, okay? And this is something that we talk a lot about in these videos with matching your seam allowances. See how at the neckline edge, there's like a little triangle that sort of overhangs at the corner. That is okay. Yeah, you can really see it right now where she's matching it. That's okay because it matches at the 5/8 of an inch seam line. So you're really looking to go in 5/8 of an inch from the edge visually, and if it matches up there, then you're good. And we're going to sew both of these seams now at 5/8 of an inch. And you want to be using a zigzag here. So it depends on your preferences on the fabric. We usually use a narrow zigzag for our seams on knits, which is 1.5 on your width and 2.5 on your length usually. Or you can do, if you have a stretchier fabric, you're really concerned, a closer fit, you're concerned about it being able to stretch, you can go with a wider zigzag. You can go up to 2.5 by 2.5 on the width and length. So a more square zigzag. And that will allow those seams to stretch. And now we're going to press them open. So there's always a lot of talk about pressing and knits and if it's necessary. And it really depends on the type of knit fabric. Some slinky jerseys, you really don't notice if you press it or not, so you don't really need to. See how crisp it looks when she is pressing it now? This fabric responds really well to pressing, so I would definitely recommend that you press your seams open. Sometimes you want to press your seams to one side when you do a zigzag because there is some height to that seam, but because this fabric is on the thicker side, it's really good to press it open. So just kind of smush your zigzags down as you're pressing with a little bit of steam. And you can also press from the right side as well, just to really set those stitches. And it's looking so beautiful. This fabric is so nice. I really love this trainer's fleece that we found at our local sewing shop. Now we're going to show you how to sew the crew neck neckband. We have two pieces because it's in two parts with seams that are offset just behind the shoulder seams of the sweatshirt itself. So the front neckband is a lot longer, well, not a lot, but it's significantly longer than the back one, as you can see here, because the seams are going to be set behind the shoulder seams, okay? So the longer one is the front, the shorter one is the back. And you're putting them right sides together and pinning at the short ends. And those short ends have an angled shape to them so that when you turn them in, they have a fold at the inner neckline. And it's going to lay nice and flat against your neck. Okay, so we're stitching with our zigzag stitch at 5/8 of an inch, and you're going to want to pivot at the angled inner corner where the notch is. This is that rib knit that we found on Amazon that actually has a nice amount of body to it. The only tricky thing is it's sold in small rectangular pieces, and we do link to it in the instructions if you're curious about this because it is a really beautiful shade of pink. So you may just need to really look at those dimensions before you order because it's not like buying yardage. Okay, so now we are going to notch into where the clips are. Okay, so you can take out a triangular shaped notch using some nice sharp scissors. Now you can grab your cat seam roll. I don't know if we've seen the cat seam roll on video yet. We've only seen the ham, so this is an exciting day. Okay, so you're gonna press these seam allowances open. You can use a little steam to get it to press flat. And now you can just remove some sort of extra bulk on these seam allowances by clipping across diagonally at the raw edge here. So you're just holding your scissors diagonally and trimming away those little excess seam allowances. And now finally, you might want to just trim these seams down, these seam allowances down just a little bit. You can trim them down by about 1/4 inch. And again, that will help reduce bulk. These sweatshirt knits and rib knits can get pretty bulky, especially when you have several layers on top of each other. So it's good to trim down where you can. Okay, so now we're going to fold our neckband wrong sides together as it will be worn, and match all our seams and pin the raw edges together. You have some notches to match there too, so be mindful of those. And you're just folding it in half lengthwise, and then we're going to baste it together so that it's all in one nice tidy piece for when we go to attach it to the sweatshirt. So as always, you're matching your match points and notches first, and then you can fill in any pins in between as needed. And now we're going to baste around this at 1/2 inch, okay? You want to be just slightly inside your regular seam allowance. And you can use your zigzag here, and then you can also use a slightly longer stitch length if you like. You know, normally when we're basting, we use a longer length stitch, so you could go to 4 or 5. And there is your basted neckband ready to apply to the sweatshirt. Okay, so now we're actually going to sew the neckband to the sweatshirt neckline. And keep in mind that the shoulder seams are sewn, but the side seams are not for now, okay? That makes it easier to sew this because you can just lay it out flat like this. Okay, so Kristen has put pins anywhere that there's a notch on the neckband, and there's a double notch that matches up to the neckline of the sweatshirt at center back, okay? So she's matching there first, and then she realizes she needs to turn it the other way to make this work. And it's a little bit of a puzzle to figure out. So there is a pin that matches the shoulder seam. That notch matches the shoulder seam, which means that the seam on the neckband will be just behind the shoulder seam. They do not match up, okay? So very important to keep that in mind. You'll probably naturally want to match shoulder seam to shoulder seam. And we did try that initially on the pattern, but it makes things very bulky. And then I started looking at some of my knit garments, like t-shirts and sweatshirts. I know you guys think I don't wear any of that stuff at home, but I do. And they always have offset seams to reduce bulk so that you don't have a seam on top of a seam. Okay, so that's why we did it that way, so it's just slightly back. Okay, and then she is just going around and pinning in between them. You might need to stretch the neckband slightly to get it to fit, but not too much, okay? So it should be matching pretty much 1-to-1, but maybe just a little bit of stretching on the ribbon. Okay, so now we are stitching with a zigzag at 5/8 of an inch. And this is a little bit of a challenge to sew because it's such a tight inner curve here. So you can see as Kristen's sewing that it's trying to create some little folds and ripples out from the neckline. So you're gonna have to really take it slow and be careful not to accidentally sew a pleat or a gather into your seam here. And if you see that that's starting to happen, then just take a moment, put your needle down and raise your presser foot and kind of release any of those folds behind the presser foot as best you can. Okay, so now we're just checking to make sure that we didn't get any weird little creases sewn in, and it looks pretty good. And we're gonna do some trimming and steaming steps right now so that we can get it to lay even flatter. So you can trim your neckline down, the seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. And also, this is a great seam to serge as well so that you have a nice tidy finish in there, or you could zigzag them together. And you might want to clip before you do that because this is a real tight neckline, or real close to the neck, I guess I should say. You can get some tension there, and it helps the appearance of the neckline to give it a few clips around there to release any of that tension. And then you could serge or zigzag. But it's really important to steam this. It's kind of like when you tailor a jacket. I know this is a very different kind of garment, but you want to steam it so that it holds the shape that you want it to hold when you're wearing it. So we're just using some steam over a curved surface like a cat ham. And you're not really pressing down too much, but you're steaming and you're helping the neckband take the shape that you want it to take, which is smaller at the interior circumference than where it meets the sweatshirt, right? And that will help it lay flat. And so you can give it a final steam here, laid on a flat surface. Again, don't press down too hard, just use some steam to get the ribbing to constrict the way you want. And there we go, a sewn on neckband. Okay, now we're ready to attach a sleeve. We're gonna do one on camera and then one off. So normally with wovens and most of our patterns, you will sew the side seams first and then set in the sleeve. Now knits can be a little different because you can apply them flat before sewing the underarm seam on the sleeve and the side seam of the garment, okay? So you can see we're putting them right sides together without those underarm and side seams sewn. So you're matching your shoulder seam notch on the sleeve to the shoulder seam of the garment, right sides together, of course, and you want to really make sure here that your notches are matching. You want a single notch, which means it's the front of the garment, and then a double notch, which means it's the back. Okay, so make sure that your sleeves are matching the notches on your garment so that you know you're putting the correct sleeve on the correct side. And again, as always, our best practice is to match our notches and match points first. So now you can see after doing notches, Kristen is going to doing the underarm point where the sleeve matches the sweatshirt, and then filling in pins in between. And I really wanted this sweatshirt to not have a drop shoulder shape like a lot of sweatshirts do. I wanted it to look more like a set-in sleeve. So it does have a pronounced sleeve cap. That's that curved area on the sleeve. And so you will need to kind of get these pieces to work together, the shapes of them, because they're not two flat pieces, right? So just take your time, and you're stitching with a zigzag at 5/8 of an inch. Around the sleeve cap. And the arm side, of course. And now you can trim these seam allowances down. First, yeah, just give it a check and make sure you didn't get any little weird ripples or pleats or anything in your seam. You can always go back and fix it if you did. And now we're going to trim these seam allowances down. So there are a couple approaches you could take here. You could just trim these down as one and then serge them together, or even just run this through the serger now and trim it simultaneously with finishing your seam allowances. That is very valid. Or you can, if you're worried about bulk, you could take the time to grade and then clip and notch and then serge. So you get all those benefits of grading and clipping and notching, even if you serge afterwards. It's not really a one or the other kind of situation. So you can see what Kristen is doing now. She's grading so that the sleeve seam allowance is slightly wider than the sweatshirt seam allowance, which will help by not having two seam allowances, the edges right on top of each other, which can create a ridge and some bulk. And now she's going to clip into the seam allowances just to help it lay flat, because this is a curved seam. And now we're going to press. So we're going to press those seam allowances towards the sleeve. And now you can see that on the sleeve seam allowance, there is some rippling, just like if you were setting in a woven sleeve. So we decided to go around and do some notches here. I love how Kristen does her notches, because she does one direction, right, with an angle, and then she goes back and completes the triangles going the other direction, which I love that approach. Seems very efficient, but I can't get myself to do it that way. I have to do each little notch individually. But it's a cool little trick. And now repressing. And like I said, you can do all the grading, the clipping and notching, and then go serge it. And you will still get those benefits by doing all that work before you finish the seam allowances. But if you're not worried about bulk, like I said, you could have just serged it and trimmed down to about 1/4 inch. So there you go. We're going to do our other sleeve, and then we'll come back and do the side seam and underarm seams. Okay, so now we're ready to sew that side seam. So you're going to put the sweatshirt right sides together. You can really see all of those clipped seam allowances in there, and then, yeah, you could go serge them all, like I said, to get a little bit of a neater finish inside there. And now we're matching right sides together and matching the sleeve from the wrist and pinning these raw edges together. And now you're going to go to your next match point, which is the underarm seam. And those seam allowances need to stay pressed towards the sleeve. So keep that in mind as you're pinning and as you're sewing. And then your next match point is the waist. So we're going to put a pin there as well. And then you can just fill in some pins in between. And now we're going to stitch from the waist up to the wrist. So we're stitching this way just to make it easier when you get to that underarm seam. You know that your seam allowances are your presser foot is going to press them the way that you want them to go anyway. Does that make sense? So yeah, we're getting to now, and you don't have to kind of fight with it to make the seam allowances stay pressed the direction that you want them to. Okay, so narrow zigzag, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And now we can press this open, and this is an awkward seam to press, so keep that in mind. You're going to want something you can put inside your garment if possible. So a cat seam roll, for instance, or a sleeve board would be really nice here. You're going to start in the body of the sweatshirt on the side seams and press open, and then you can kind of stuff that seam roll inside the sleeve or a sleeve board, but it does get quite narrow at the wrist. This has a more fitted look at the wrist of the garment, so just keep that in mind. And go as far as you can with the seam roll and press with a little bit of steam. And now, because we can't get the seam roll in at the wrist, you can just lay the sweatshirt flat, but make sure that you don't accidentally press creases on the sides of the sleeves. So just kind of use the point of the iron and get in there with some steam, and you should be fine. So that is one side, and you're going to repeat that on the other side, of course. And then you have what's really looking like a sweatshirt. Okay, so now we're going to work on assembling the sleeve cuffs. And it's pretty similar to the neckband, except easier, because they're just rectangles. They don't have any of those inward angled seams. So we're just taking each rectangle and putting them right sides together and matching that notch. And aligning the raw edges along the short end. And we're going to pin and then stitch at 5/8 of an inch to create a ring. So again, make sure you're using a zigzag here so that this seam stretches. Nice straight seam, unlike the neckband. And you're going to press this open, and of course, if you feel like your fabric is very bulky, you could trim down these seam allowances, but you don't have to. And now, just like we did on the neckband, we're going to fold this in half lengthwise with the wrong sides together. match the raw edges, match that seam that we just sewed, pin, and then we're going to baste the raw edges together. So this is a nice tidy little piece for us to attach to our sleeve hem. So because it's such a small little circumference, you probably won't be able to get it around the free arm of your machine if you have one. So you're gonna have to work from the inside of this ring, like Kristen is doing right now. And this is just basting, so we're at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And stitching all the way around in a little circle. Backstitch, trim your threads, and there you have 2 little matching cuffs to attach to your sweatshirt. Okay, so now we're going to attach our cuffs to our sweatshirt. And Kristen has already done one. You can see how cute it looks. So what we're going to do now is we're going to divide this cuff into quarters. Okay, so you can see that she's matching the seam that we just sewed to the notch, and those are the first 2 quadrants, and then putting a pin where it folds. So you have the cuff divided into 4 distinct sections, which will help you match it to your sleeve. This is what we do anytime we're applying like an elastic ring to something. I'm thinking of like lingerie sewing that we've done in the past, like the Vargas panties, or the Skipper bodysuit or something like that, where you have to sew a ring of elastic and then get it to fit into another circumference like this. So usually you have to stretch it a lot more though to get it to match, and that's why you need those quadrants. With this, you're gonna see there's not a lot of easing into on the sleeve. There isn't like that blousey look like we're gonna have at the waist. So you're matching the seams first, and then you can match your pins and your notches. Make sure that those seam allowances stay pressed open on the underarm seam. And now we're going to sew in a ring here. And again, because it's such a tiny little circumference, you're going to need to work from within the ring rather than putting it on the free arm of your machine. And you're going to stitch 5/8 of an inch using a zigzag all the way around. And there you go. Your seams get pressed towards your sleeve, and you can trim them down and serge them, or just serge, or just trim them down. You have so many choices, so many options with how you want to finish knits, because these aren't going to fray, but just for, tidiness sake, you may wish to finish them in some way, but you don't have to. So you can trim down to about 1/4 inch, make sure it stays pressed towards the sleeve. You can also grade a little bit so that your sleeve seam allowance is wider than your cuff seam allowance. And now when we turn it right side out, you'll see how cute it looks. But like I said, not a lot of blousing or easing that goes into this cuff. It's pretty one-to-one the way that it attaches. So it's a nice, sleek look. And there you go. You can give it a little final press. And then we're going to be ready to move on to the waistband. Okay, so now we're ready to assemble our waistband. And I'm sure you can guess the steps that are coming up here because we've kind of done it twice already. So we are putting this right sides together, matching the short ends, sewing that seam, pressing open, and then folding lengthwise and basting the raw edges together. Okay, so we're just gonna watch Kristen do all of these steps, but I know you know how to do it at this point, so I won't belabor it. But I was just thinking about when we bought our sweatshirt fabrics and where we sourced them. And I'm going to be really interested to hear how you are all finding your fabrics and if you have some good sources for them. But I managed to find the sweatshirt fabric at a local place, Beetle and Fred, where I had my book party and where I used to teach. And it was a very funny situation. I was there with Andrea and some retreat attendees. And I really wanted to buy some of this sweatshirt fleece, but I didn't want to give away that we were doing a sweatshirt to the retreat attendees because you all, if any of you are listening right now, you're all very, well, you're like really keeping an eye out for hints to what the next pattern is. And so I was trying to avoid that. So I asked Andrea to buy some of this trainer's sweatshirt fleece. But it's really not like Andrea to go buy a bunch of sweatshirt fleece. And Katie, the owner of the store, was sort of giving her purchase the side eye. And Andrea said, well, I'm going to make some sweatshirts for my kids. And Katie just sort of nodded. And we were dying about it later because it's like the last thing that Andrea would want to spend her free time doing is making like plain sweatshirts for her kids, like really would never happen. And so we were just laughing at how Katie just accepted that story. And then later on, the truth came out. And she's like, I did think it was a little weird that you were going to go home after sewing all day at Charm to make plain fleece sweatshirts for your children. So, but no judgment, whatever you all want to do. I think it's really fun being able to make your own sweatshirts and basics like this, especially if you can get the fit right. You know, you can get that cropped 50s shape with that blouson waistband is really cute with like a Stanwyck skirt, and it really gives those charm school vibes. Okay, there's your ring ready to go, and we're going to attach the waistband next. Okay, so now we are going to prepare to attach our waistband because there are a few steps that you want to do to pin it and to divide the ease of the sweatshirt into the waistband, which is smaller. So you're going to want to divide into quadrants. So like I was saying in the last chapter, or the chapter before, you are going to want to divide into quadrants, and this is a sort of standard practice when you're sewing something that needs to be stretched to fit another section. So one way you can divide into quadrants is you can, like Kristen is doing right now on the sweatshirt, is find the side seams, match them to each other, and then where it folds, dividing that section, that would be the center front and the center back. So you're finding the midpoint between each section. And so the side seams are marking quadrants, and your center front and center back pins are your quadrants. And then you would match the seams and the notches on the waistband to those pins. So matching notches to the side seams, matching the seam on the waistband to the center back pin on your sweatshirt, and so on. So matching those 4 points first. Center front, center back, and side seams. You want to make sure that your side seams on your sweatshirt stay pressed open when you pin them and when you sew them, so just keep an eye on that. And you have those notches on your waistband to match. And Kristen's already pinned center front and center back, but she had a notch to match to the pin there. And now you can look between each section. You can see that the sweatshirt is a lot bigger than the waistband, and you're going to need to stretch the waistband to get it to fit and create that bloused effect. So it can be a little tricky to pin these sections. And what Kristen is showing you is one way to do it is that you can stretch them out, find the center point, and place a pin there. You don't have to use a ton of pins when you're doing this, but what you're going to do is just a few in between each quadrant and just divide in half each section. Stretch, find the midpoint, and place a pin there. Now, the other thing is that you could only pin at your quadrants, and that's kind of how I tend to do it, is that I will just stretch as I sew, and the pieces will naturally match up. But that can be a little tricky because you have to make sure that your raw edges are staying aligned as you stitch. So this kind of helps you keep everything aligned on top of each other. So just a few pins, maybe 3 pins in between each section, and just finding the midpoint between that ease. So dividing once and then dividing each of those sections. And this is another fun tip from Kristen, is if you're finding it hard to stretch and then pin, another thing you can do is divide each section on its own, place a pin there, do the same thing on the sweatshirt section, divide it, find the midpoint, place a pin, and then match those pins, right? Because you know that that's the midpoint between each. So it would be distributed evenly when you go to sew. So yet again, lots of ways to do this. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like once it's pinned. You can see all that extra ease in the sweatshirt. All right, so I wanted to give you a couple tips if you want to make a small pattern change to the cropped version. Now this, as you can see the one I'm wearing, it has a sort of bloused effect, which I really like, especially with the cropped waistband. But if you want something more fitted through the sweatshirt, that is certainly possible. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Now, the easiest way to do this would be to try on the sweatshirt as you're making it and pin out the excess that you want to remove and then re-sew your seams. But let's look at the pattern too to talk about how it comes together and how you would make this alteration to the pattern itself. So the reason you get that bloused effect is because the ribbing is cut much smaller, so it's cut closer to your waist measurement, and then the sweatshirt is eased in for this bloused effect that we're getting. Right, so that means that the sweatshirt is going to be significantly bigger than the ribbing at the waist, and then you have to stretch the ribbing to match the sweatshirt. Now, here is my sweatshirt front, just to illustrate this, and my crop length waistband. This is my center front notch, and this is my side seam notch, okay? And then there's a seam at the center back. So just to illustrate on the front, this notch would match your center front fold. And then here, you see how far this side seam notch is from the side seam of the sweatshirt, and all of this excess gets eased in. And remember, you have that 4 times, right? Front, back, on both sides. So that's a lot of extra. I wouldn't recommend removing all of the extra ease in there, because then you're going to have this really extreme angle here when you go to taper back up to the original armhole. So I would say, what if we just kind of cut that in half, right? Remove half of that extra ease. So let's say we want to take away, let's say 1.25 inches, right, from the side seam. So it's really easy. All you would do is just, I wouldn't even worry about seam allowances, okay? You're just going to go from the cut edge of the pattern to up to the cut edge, all right? So I would come in 1.25 inches and make a mark here, and then angle up to the original armhole here. Like so. And then you would just trim off that excess, and you would do the same thing on the sweatshirt back. And then when you go to sew this to the ribbing, you're going to have much less excess ease to ease into your ribbing, and you'll get a more slim effect and less of a bloused effect at the waistline. So that's just a little pattern making tip trick for you, and I hope you find that helpful. So next we'll move on to our next sewing steps. Now we're ready to sew the waistband to the garment. And you can see on this version, we didn't do that adjustment to reduce the ease. So we've got a lot to sort of ease in here as we're stitching. So what's going to happen is you're just going to pull the two layers so that they're flat together, even as you're stitching. And you're sort of stretching the ribbing so that it's even with the sweatshirt, making sure that your raw edges stay aligned. And what I like to do is kind of pull from the front and back, like Kristen is doing right now, to create a sort of flat surface where you're not putting too much tension on the front of the machine, of the garment, and then it's not really pulling through the machine. But you can kind of create a nice taut surface, stretching from front to back, stretching the ribbing, which is very stretchy and easy to stretch, to fit the sweatshirt itself. And if you did that pattern adjustment that we talked about in the last chapter, then you'll have less of this to do, of course, but still probably a little bit. So again, using a zigzag stitch, 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and just stitching all the way around like this. And in the next chapter, we're going to talk a little bit about applying those embellishments, like the varsity letters. But if you're not doing that, then this is the last step, really. So that's exciting. And, well, of course, I love the Letterman look. This sweatshirt would look so cute in just a solid, even just as it is now in the ivory with the pink ribbing. You don't need to add that varsity touch to it if you don't want to. I think it would be a really cute everyday staple. And like I said, it pairs really well with a lot of charm separates, especially this cropped version. Looks so good with a full skirt like the Stanwyck skirt or a circle skirt. Also, of course, with your pants like the Maryland jeans, your Audrey cigarette pants. It's a really cute look. Okay, so now you can see how much the sweatshirt gathered into the waistband, which is exactly what we're looking for. So you're going to want to check it from the outside just to make sure that everything looks good, that you didn't accidentally get a little fold or pleat that you don't want, and then it's just nice, all evenly distributed gathers around the waist. And once you're happy with everything, then you can trim down your seam allowances. Another thing to note is that even if you don't feel like you need to press your fabrics for whatever reason, you do want to steam your ribbing after you stretch it like that. It's really important because you're stretching it out and then you want to sort of steam it back to its original shape after putting that much tension on it, right? So make sure to at least give your ribbing a steam. And of course you want ribbing with good recovery, right? It's no good if you have bad ribbing that just sort of stretches out of shape, because then you're not going to get your cute little cropped waist effect here, your blouson effect. All right, so trimming down the seam allowances, grading if you want, and then the seam allowances get pressed towards the sweatshirt. And again, just as I've been saying throughout this whole video, you can serge this as well now too, or if you wanted to skip the grading, you could just serge and trim it down as you're serging. Other options, of course, are zigzagging those seam allowances together using a wide zigzag on your machine, on your sewing machine. Or just leaving them, because these aren't going to fray. It's just a matter of what you like, how it looks, how it feels while you're wearing it, all of that. So just pressing from the right side, giving a little bit of steam. So giving steam to the ribbing and then sort of pressing the sweatshirt up and out away from the ribbing. And there we go. Look how cute that is, even without the varsity letter, right? So just a really great little everyday staple. And so we're finished with the sweatshirt without the embellishment now. And in the next chapter, we'll just talk about appliques. Okay, so let's talk about appliques. Now you could put on one of these large varsity letters, centering it sort of in the chest area, just a couple inches below the neckband. My biggest piece of advice is to pin it and then try the sweatshirt on to make sure that you're happy with the placement, because it may look good flat on the table and then you try it on and you think, oh no, I was totally wrong. I was totally off on that. And then you can adjust before you actually stitch. So yeah, you could use 2 of these little letters, or just one even, on one side on the chest, or you can use one big one in the center. But the important thing is that you are going to want to use a zipper foot to attach these, because you can see all of these varsity letters have sort of a ridge around the outside, a little like sort of lip that you can sew on and really get into those tight little corners. They do sell some iron-on letters. I would proceed with caution on those because you can melt your fabric that way. So be careful. And it's always a good idea to stitch on. Okay, everyone, so you are done with your varsity sweatshirt. I hope that you have loved learning to make this. We've learned a lot of new skills this month working with sweatshirt fleece and ribbing and making that little pattern hack adjustment. And I can tell you, we have some really fun matching gym shorts coming out on the 15th of the month for our bonus tiers for a very cute little vintage gym vibe. So I can't wait to see your gym uniforms for Charm School. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye. So that's just a little pattern making tip trick for you, and I hope you find that helpful. So next we'll move on to our next sewing steps. You can just cut that face off of Amy's like, no.